All right, so today we're gonna dive into Simon Sinek's Start with Why.
All right.
And I know you're a big fan of this book.
Huge fan.
And we wanted to kind of go through it and figure out what are the most important things that people should take away from this book,
Yeah.
especially about this idea of the golden circle, the why, how, what.
Yeah.
And I think it's really fascinating because it helps give you a framework for not just understanding how other people are being successful or how ideas are spreading, but also how you yourself can be more successful and spread your own ideas.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this book so powerful is it's really actionable.
Yeah.
It's not just theoretical or conceptual. You can really take these ideas and put them into practice in your own life, in your own work.
Yeah. So I think one of the most compelling stories in the book is right up front.
Right.
And it's about the quest for flight.
Yeah.
And you have these two groups. You have Samuel Langley, who was very well funded.
Yes.
Had the best engineers.
Top talent.
Tons of media attention.
Right.
He was all set up for success.
It seemed like a sure thing.
Everyone thought he was going to be the first one to achieve flight. But what he was focused on was he was focused on just building a flying machine.
Building the machine.
Didn't really matter what it was for what the impact was going to be. He was just trying to create that machine.
Right. Just solve the technical challenge.
And then you have the Wright brothers, who had a lot less funding.
Far fewer resources.
Definitely not in the public eye as much as Langley.
Right.
And yet what drove them was this deep belief in the power of flight.
Their why.
Yeah, their why.
Why are we doing this?
Like, why is flight important? And it was about changing the world. It was about, really pushing humanity forward. And it was so powerful, this belief that they had.
Yeah.
That they were able to inspire this small team.
Yeah, they had a dedicated group of people who believed in the mission.
So, and here's the interesting thing. Langley was not successful ultimately in achieving sustained flight.
Right.
It was the Wright brothers.
It was the guys with the why.
Who ended up making history.
Right.
And so that really, I think, is a key takeaway for people, is that starting with why is not just some nice thing to have.
No.
It's not just some feel-good.
It's fundamental.
It's really a fundamental driver of innovation, of making things happen.
I think what's so interesting, too, is if you look at it from the perspective of motivation.
Yeah.
Langley seemed to be motivated by the external rewards.
The prestige.
Yeah, the fame, the recognition, the money potentially, all of that. And the Wright brothers were driven by something from within.
Yeah.
Their belief in the importance of flight.
Right. And I think that's so powerful.
And that's what gives you the resilience, too, to overcome all the inevitable obstacles that you're going to face. Because it's not going to be easy, and it wasn't easy for them.
Yeah. And so, and this concept of why Sinek expands it beyond just individuals and talks about how it applies to organizations and even social movements.
Yeah.
So, like, if you look at Apple, for instance,
Yeah.
they're not just selling computers and phones.
No.
They're selling this idea of challenging the status quo.
Right.
Of thinking differently.
Empowering the individual.
Yeah, of empowering people. And that's their why.
That's their why.
And the products, the beautiful, sleek products, those are just proof of their why.
Proof of their belief.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so fascinating is that's what creates such strong customer loyalty, is because people are buying into that belief.
They're not buying they're buying the why.
And it's so interesting how consistent that is with, like, Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
He didn't galvanize a movement by saying...
By having a list of policy to...
Yeah, by listing out all the things that need to change.
Right.
He did it by articulating this incredibly powerful vision of equality.
Right.
This why.
This why, this belief.
That resonated with millions of people.
And inspired them to take action.
Yeah, and so it wasn't just about, okay, well, let's go march and protest so we can get this list of things. It was, we're marching and protesting because we believe in this future.
Right. And that's a really important distinction that Sinek makes, is between leaders and those who lead.
Yeah.
So someone might have the title of a leader.
Yeah.
They might be in a position of leadership.
Yeah, right.
But the people who truly lead are the ones who inspire action based on a shared belief.
Yeah, and it comes down to, what are you motivating people with?
Right.
And I think he goes into this really fascinating discussion about manipulation versus inspiration, which I think is so relevant for anyone who's trying to lead or build a movement or even market a product or service.
Absolutely.
So manipulation is something we see all the time,
Yeah.
like price promotions,
Fair.
fear aspirations,
Yeah.
peer pressure novelty.
Trying to make you feel like you're going to miss out
Yeah,
if
exactly.
you don't buy this now.
And these tactics can work.
Yeah, they can.
Like they can drive sales. You can get people to act.
Right. They're very effective in the short term.
Yeah, but they don't create loyalty.
No.
So like you look at GM
Yeah.
and they were constantly doing these cashback incentives.
Right.
And arguably they made a customer base that was more loyal to the cashback than they were to the cars.
The cashback junkies.
Yeah.
They were hooked on the deal.
Yeah. And so, or you look at the Motorola RAZR phone.
Yeah.
It was super thin. It was trendy. It was cool.
It was a novelty.
Yeah. But ultimately it was a novelty. It wasn't something that was built to last.
And it didn't build lasting brand loyalty.
Yeah.
It was just a flash in the pan.
And so I think that's the key distinction is manipulation can get you results, but it's not going to get you that deep loyalty that you get from inspiration.
Right, because with manipulation, people are acting out of self-interest.
Right.
They're doing it for themselves.
For the deal.
For the deal.
Yeah.
For the discount, for the fear of missing out. But with inspiration, they're acting because they believe in something bigger than themselves.
They want to be a part of it.
They want to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I think this is where the golden circle comes in.
Yeah.
So can you kind of walk us through what is the golden circle?
So the golden circle, it's a really simple framework,
Uh-huh.
but it's very powerful. And it consists of 3 concentric circles.
Okay.
So the outermost circle is the what.
The what?
Every single organization, every company knows what they do.
Right.
These are the products they sell, the services they offer.
Yeah, it's the easiest thing to identify.
It's the most tangible,
Yeah.
the most easily defined.
Okay.
Then if you go one layer deeper,
Yeah.
you have the how.
The how.
And this is where some organizations start to differentiate themselves.
Okay.
This is their unique selling proposition, their processes.
Right. So like how they do things differently or better than the competition.
Exactly, their value proposition.
Okay.
And then right at the very heart of the golden circle is the why. And this is the purpose, the cause, the belief that drives the organization.
And this is what very few companies can actually articulate.
Very few.
Yeah.
And this is what separates the truly inspiring organizations from the rest.
And so the order in which you communicate these things is really important.
Critically important.
Yeah, so Sinek talks about this difference between inside-out communication and outside-in communication.
Right.
Can you explain that?
So the inspiring leaders and organizations, they communicate from the inside out.
Okay.
They start with why.
The why.
Then they explain how they do it, and then they tell you what it is they actually do.
And the what becomes like the proof of the why?
Exactly.
Okay.
But most companies communicate from the outside in.
What? Why?
Yeah, they tell you what they do,
Yeah.
maybe how they do it, but they never really get to the why.
And so it doesn't connect on an emotional level?
It doesn't resonate.
So can you give me some concrete examples of this?
Yeah, so a classic example is Apple and the iPod. So when Apple launched the iPod, Creative Technology actually already had a portable MP3 player.
Right.
That held multiple gigabytes of music.
It was out before the iPod.
It was out before the iPod.
Wow.
But their marketing focused on what?
Like the specs?
Yeah, they said it's a 5 GB MP3 player.
Okay.
Apple came along almost 2 years later,
And they said?
and they said 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Yeah.
They focused on the why.
Like what it meant for you.
Exactly, the benefit to the user,
Mm.
the experience, the feeling.
And it wasn't about the technology itself. It was about how it could change your life.
It's about what it enables you to do.
And that's what I think is so fascinating.
And people bought into that.
Yeah.
And the iPod became a massive success.
And then you have like Dell trying to enter the consumer electronics market. And
Yeah.
they made like PDAs and MP3 players.
Good products.
They were good products.
Yeah.
But people just didn't associate Dell with that. They were
No.
like, Dell makes computers.
They make computers.
Why are they making MP3 players?
It didn't feel authentic.
Yeah, it didn't make sense.
And that's because they were so defined by what they did
Right.
that they couldn't really expand beyond that.
And even Apple changed their name from Apple Computer Inc. to just Apple Inc. to
Exactly.
reflect this broader why.
Yeah, they're not just about computers anymore.
Yeah, it's about this idea of challenging conventions and empowering people.
Through technology.
Yeah.
And this really taps into a fundamental human need, which is the need to belong.
Yeah.
Sinek argues that we are drawn to companies and brands that share our values and beliefs.
It's like we want to be a part of
We
something.
want to be a part of a tribe.
Yeah.
And the products and services we buy they become symbols of those beliefs.
Right. It's like a badge.
Exactly.
Ew.
It says something about who you are.
And he uses that great analogy from Dr. Seuss, the Sneetches,
Right.
with the star belly Sneetches and the plain deli Sneetches, and they all wanted to be in the in-group.
They all wanted to fit in.
Yeah, and they were willing to spend money.
Go to great lengths.
Yeah, to do it. And I think that's so true of how we as humans behave.
That's a powerful motivator.
And so when a company can tap into that,
Yeah.
it's like they're giving people a way to express themselves.
Exactly.
And to belong.
And to feel connected to something bigger than themselves.
So Apple, again, is a great example of this. Like, their customers, they're not just buying a phone.
No.
They're buying into this whole ecosystem.
This whole way of life.
Yeah, and this way of thinking. And it's so interesting how, like, a partnership with you, too, makes sense.
Because they're seen as sharing similar values.
Yeah, but a partnership with Celine Dion.
Even though she's very popular.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite fit.
It doesn't feel right.
And that's because it's not aligned with their why.
Yeah. And so this feeling that we get, it's almost like intuition.
It's gut feeling.
Yeah.
And Sinek actually delves into the biology of decision-making.
Oh, wow.
To explain why that is. So he says that our gut feelings, those decisions that just feel right, they originate in the limbic brain.
Okay.
Which is the part of the brain that controls our emotions and behavior.
But not language?
But not language.
Okay.
So we feel it before we can explain it.
Oh, interesting.
And then the neocortex, which is the part of the brain that controls language and rational thought.
That comes later.
That comes later and tries to rationalize the decision.
So we make the decision with our gut.
Yes.
And then we try to explain it with our head.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So when a company doesn't communicate their why, we're forced to rely on the what and the how.
The data.
The data, the features, the benefits.
And it's just not as compelling.
And that's why manipulation can sometimes be effective in those situations.
Because it appeals to our rational.
Our insecurities, our fear of missing out.
And so it's not just about having a why.
Right.
It's about clarity, discipline, and consistency.
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit?
So you need to be crystal clear about your why.
Like, what is it?
What is your purpose?
Yeah.
What is your cause? What is your belief?
Okay.
And then you need the discipline of how
you're going to do it.
How you're going to bring that why to life.
Yeah.
And that's about adhering to your values and your principles.
Okay.
And then you need consistency of
what you actually do.
Everything you say and do needs to be in alignment with your why.
So it's like a three-legged stool.
Yeah.
If you're missing one of those legs,
it falls apart.
It's not going to work.
And that's when companies resort to manipulation.
Right, because they're trying to make up for the lack of a clear why.
Yeah, they're trying to shortcut the process.
And so Southwest Airlines is a great example of this.
Yes.
Their why is to champion the common man.
Make air travel accessible and affordable.
And how is their low-cost operational model?
Right.
And what is providing air transportation.
And it all works together.
That is so consistent.
And that's what's built their incredible loyalty.
And this brings us to trust.
Trust.
Which I think is so important in any relationship.
Fundamental.
Whether it's personal or professional.
Yeah, if you don't have trust, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
And trust comes from a shared sense of values and beliefs.
So if people believe in your why,
yeah,
and they see that you're consistently living it,
they will trust you.
They'll trust you.
And they'll be loyal to you.
So Sinek talks about this great example of Gordon Bethune turning around Continental Airlines.
Yeah, he was brought in to fix the airline.
Yeah, it was in a really bad spot.
It was a mess.
And what did he do?
The first thing he did was focus on the employees.
He was like, we need to treat our employees better.
Yeah, he understood that happy employees lead to happy customers.
And so by focusing on the why of taking care of the employees,
he was able to improve performance and rebuild trust.
It's amazing.
And another great example is Shackleton's recruitment ad.
Oh, yeah, for his Antarctic expedition.
Yeah, this is a classic story.
So what was so special about this ad?
Well, he was very upfront about
what they were going to be doing.
It's going to be dangerous. It's going to be cold.
Yeah, it was going to be brutal.
You might die.
Yeah.
But he also appealed to a very specific why.
Which was?
Honor and recognition for those who survived.
Wow.
He was looking for people who shared his belief in the mission.
He wasn't just looking for anyone.
No, he was looking for the right people.
The people who believed in the why.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the idea of how does a tipping point tip?
Well,
so how does an idea or a product go from being niche to being mainstream?
Mainstream.
And Sinek uses this law of diffusion of innovations
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
So it basically breaks down the population into 5 groups.
Okay.
You have the innovators,
The early adopters.
the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards.
Okay, so for something to go mainstream,
Yeah, to really take off,
you need to get past the early adopters.
you need to reach the early majority. But the early majority, they need to see that the early adopters are on board.
So it's like a social proof thing.
Exactly. They need to see that people they trust are already using it and believing in it.
And the early adopters are the ones who are drawn to the why.
They're the ones who buy into the vision.
So a great example of this is TiVo.
Yeah.
So they had this amazing product.
A great product.
Yeah, but they didn't really explain why people needed it.
They focused on the features and the functionality.
Yeah, like you could pause live TV and rewind live TV.
Which was revolutionary at the time.
Yeah, but they didn't connect that to why people would want to do that.
Right.
Like, what does that actually mean for you?
What's the benefit to your life?
Yeah, and so they didn't really get those early adopters.
And they struggled to reach the mainstream.
Yeah, and then you have Martin Luther King Jr.,
Yeah.
who had such a clear why
So powerful.
that it attracted those early adopters.
The people who really believed in his vision,
Yeah,
and they spread the word,
and they became advocates.
and that's what led to the tipping point.
Events like the March on Washington.
Exactly.
And this leads to the idea of why types and how types.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
So Sinek says that there are 2 main types of people in organizations.
Okay.
Why types and how types.
So why types are.
Visionaries. They're the ones who are inspired by a cause or a purpose.
And how types are.
The practical ones, they're the ones who know how to get things done.
So you need both.
You need both.
Yeah, to be successful.
The why types provide the vision.
And how types bring it to life.
Exactly.
And then there's this idea of the split,
Yeah.
where the why goes fuzzy.
So as organizations grow and mature,
Yeah.
sometimes they lose sight of their why.
They get so focused on the what and the how.
The day-to-day operations.
Yeah. Keeping the lights on.
Making money.
And they forget why they started in the first place.
And that's when things start to go wrong.
Yeah. And so like AOL is a good example of this.
Yeah.
They had this really inspiring why early on.
They wanted to make the internet accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
But then they got so focused on growth and acquisitions
Yeah.
that they lost sight of their original purpose.
And it ultimately led to their decline.
The cautionary tale.
But there are companies that manage to avoid the split,
Yes.
and they do it by consciously measuring their why.
Right.
So like Bridgeport Financial measures compassion,
Yeah.
and Honors Construction measures work-life balance
And they find ways to quantify and track these things.
to make sure that they're not losing sight of them.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the importance of a visible leader.
The megaphone.
Yeah, the person who embodies the why and communicates it to everyone.
Like Bill Gates at Microsoft.
Yeah.
Or Steve Jobs at Apple.
They were so good at articulating the why.
And inspiring people.
Yeah, and when that leader leaves,
Yeah.
if there's not a strong internal system in place,
To uphold the why.
the company can lose its way.
And that's why it's so important to hire people who believe what you believe. Yeah. Like Howard Putnam did at Southwest Airlines.
He only hired people who were passionate about the company's mission.
And that's what created such a strong culture.
Yeah.
And so Sinek ultimately makes this argument that money is a result, not a cause.
Yeah.
Like if you focus on your why,
Yeah.
the money will follow.
It'll be successful.
But if you focus on the money,
Yeah.
you're likely to lose sight of your why.
And it'll all fall apart.
And Costco's a great example of this.
Yeah.
They treat their employees really well.
Yeah.
And that's led to incredible loyalty.
From both employees and customers.
And they've been very successful.
Without having to do a lot of advertising.
Yeah, word of mouth is their best marketing.
And then you have Walmart, which after Sam Walton died,
Yeah.
they kind of lost sight of their why.
They started focusing more on profits.
Yeah, and it led to a lot of negative consequences.
It tarnished their reputation.
Yeah.
And it hurt their employees.
And so I think the key takeaway here is that your why often comes from looking back, not looking forward.
It's about understanding your origins,
Your values.
your core beliefs,
Yeah, what truly inspires you.
and what makes you tick.
And finally, Sinek talks about this idea of competing against yourself,
Yeah.
which I think is so powerful.
So he says that the best organizations,
Yeah.
they're not focused on beating the competition.
They're focused on being better than they were yesterday.
Exactly.
It's about continuous improvement.
And he tells this great story about Ben the runner,
Yeah.
who's not trying to win races.
He's just trying to beat his own personal best.
And people are drawn to that.
Yeah.
They admire his dedication,
His commitment.
his passion.
And I think that's a great lesson for all of us.
It's about striving for excellence,
Yeah.
not just success.
So to wrap things up,
Yeah.
we've gone through a lot of really powerful ideas from Simon Sinek's Start with Why.
We have
We talked about the importance of starting with your why.
your purpose, your cause, your belief.
We broke down the Golden Circle framework.
What?
We talked about the difference between manipulation and inspiration,
Right.
the importance of clarity, discipline, and consistency,
And trust.
and the role of the leader.
A megaphone.
And ultimately, I think the core message is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
That's it.
So I'd like to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
Think about your own why.
Yeah.
What truly drives you in your work, in your relationships, in your life?
What gets you out of bed in the morning?
And how can understanding your why help you to be more successful and to inspire others?
And think about the organizations that you admire.
Yeah.
What is their why?
What do they stand for?
What do they believe in?
And how can you apply those principles to your own life?
And your own work.
So we encourage you to reflect on these ideas and to see how you can start with why.
To make a bigger impact in the world.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
See you next time.
All right, bye.